when someone's playing 20-year chess, we're playing 2-year checkers. How can we possibly compete with that?
Look, China has many advantages. They clearly are Marxist-Leninists, but they're not communist in the way that the Russians are. The Chinese are way, way more astute than that. They let their companies have a lot of leg room, a lot of rope. How much money do you want? You want $1 million? You want $100 million?
If I put you're head of policy at the White House, what would you choose?
I think
if you had to collect all the engineers, you could fill a couple of ballrooms here, and in China you would fill stadiums.
Yeah.
We've lost that ability to do that.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that hyperbole? Can we bring that skill set back?
Yeah, absolutely. A lot of people thought they were insulting, and they weren't. Fat Americans, overweight.
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, doing this stuff. Look, we don't. Those aren't the right jobs. I'm sorry, those aren't. They're good manufacturing jobs, but that's not one of them.
Do we need somebody who's like an innovation evangelist? The first person I thought was Elon Musk.
Well, what's sad about Musk, he should have just, I don't know what he was smoking, but just don't go near government.
The argument has been made, I think, effectively, probably more effectively than I could make it, in that, China with their, form of government and their, one president stays in for 10 years, one administration, until this gentleman, who's now, perhaps made himself go much longer than that, is they can afford to take a long strategic view. Whereas, we have elections every 2 years for the entire House and every 4 years for the presidency. And our outlook, therefore, is a lot less strategic and shorter. And we just can't, when someone's playing 20-year chess, we're playing, 2-year checkers. How can we possibly compete with that? So, how do we get better with this? And I think you may have mentioned it in your book, because now if you mention industrial policy, there's certain elements they'll say, well, Solyndra, you made the wrong call there. You backed the wrong course. How do we do better industrial policy?
Look, China has many advantages. One of them is, and by the way, one of the myths about China is they're socialist. They clearly are Marxist-Leninists, but they're not communist in the way that the Russians are. The communists, the Russians actually, it was a state-owned factory, and Gosplan, the central planning, told them, you're going to make 10,000 tires this month, and we'll send you 2 tons of steel to make them. I mean, that's a nightmare. Chinese are way, way more astute than that. They let their companies have a lot of leg room, a lot of rope. What they tell their companies are 2 things. They say, we want you to be going in this direction. We want an industry in China that's focused on quantum computing. We want an EV industry. You guys go figure it out. We're not going to tell you how to do it. And by the way, we're going to give you all the help you can get. How much money do you want? You want $1 million? You want $100 million? So they've kind of got that sweet spot in a way, freedom for the entrepreneurs, as long as you're going in the right direction and not criticizing Xi Jinping, you're going to do okay. And then the second part and by the way, that allows them to underprice us. And the second part here is a long-termism, both for political and their companies. Their companies take a longer-term time horizon because they're financed more by debt from the state-owned banks. And so our companies are like, oh, is it June? What's our quarterly earnings target? There was a study done by the Business Roundtable here in Washington a few years ago, and they asked 100 chief financial officers of the major 100 companies, how many of you would cut your research and development expenditures this quarter to meet your Wall Street earnings targets?
All of them?
Yeah, that's exactly all of them. Thank God only 35% said yes. 35% said no, 65% said yes. So I agree with all of that, but I think if we had a more bipartisan consensus to say, you know what, these are important industries we can't lose. The private sector has to play the lead role, but government can play a supportive role, like Congress did in the CHIPS Act, which is to support the semiconductor industry. I think we could really do okay. I think if we put our mind to it, we don't have to lose. What I worry about is it the partisanship. You've got the pretty far left wing of the Democratic Party, which is way farther left than it was in the days of Bill Clinton, even early Obama, who they hate companies, they don't want to do anything. And you got some libertarians on the right who, well, that's not the role of government. Cylinder, cylinder, cylinder. I was like, there's the space in the middle, which we need to occupy. And I think if we did, we'd do a lot better.
So I'll put you on the spot a little bit.
Sure.
If I put you, you're head of policy at the White House, and you could, pick three, industries or three places to really support, the government should put their back into it. I know it's impossible to cut Social Security and Medicare and defense and the debt, but to the extent that when we really put your back into it, what would you choose?
I think, first of all, it can't be three, but all right, you're going to hold me to that. One of them has to be to continue with semiconductors. It's a foundational industry. Second, I would argue, has to be kind of this amalgam of machine tools, robotics, machines that make the machines that make things. We have to be able to be capable on that. I don't know. Then there's a whole bunch of others, but probably something to do with materials, chemistry and materials. The Chinese are making significant. So it's one of the things people don't talk about because, this phone without a certain certain materials, it cannot be made. So I'd probably put those three as the top. That's the top ones.
So in some ways, some of it is application. Some of it is actually basic research, sort of all across the board. I guess it's just, would it be fair to say that Europe has tried to follow a strategy of industrial policy, perhaps not nearly as efficient as the Chinese, and they've had a very uneven, I suppose an uneven track record. It's like, sort of what makes government better at ultimately picking winners and losers, as the sort of the right-leaning folks would say, well, let's just let the market figure it out, because the market is better at it than having a group of bureaucrats huddling around a table trying to figure this out.
Yeah, and by the way, how did the market do when it came to the housing collapse of 2008? They really got that one right, didn't they?
That's fair.
Now, to be fair, some people argue there was government policy that distorted that. I get that. There's a couple of problems with that view. One is what economists would call externalities, and so you look at some of these industries. I'll give you an example, iconic example in sort of this economic technology literature of the development of the CAT scanning machine. The company that invented it, fantastic company, thank you for doing it. But their rate of return was about a third of what the social rate of return is. In other words, the benefits, that they couldn't capture all of the benefits. And there's so much innovation where you don't capture the benefit alone. So companies tend to underinvest in R&D, and that's been shown, which is why we have a research and development tax credit. But the other reason why I don't, and by the way, there are many, many sectors where, the free market's housing, house price controls. Are you kidding me? Government-owned housing. I mean, so don't get me wrong. The free market is very important for many, many sectors, but for some sectors, I would argue we cannot let these industries fail. They're too important to fail. We have to have an aerospace industry in the United States. We have to beef up our shipbuilding. We have to have semiconductors. Imagine if Taiwan were taken over by the PRC. They would then say, you want some of these things? Here's what you got to do. Here's my list of things, President Trump, you got to do. And we can't let that happen. So I would argue that if you differentiate between the sort of strategic industries and the non-strategic, market forces work pretty well with the non-strategics. And why can't we have this kind of, hey, we're going to be able to chew a gum and walk at the same time? There are strategic industries where we just have to say, yeah, there's going to be a role for government. Semiconductor is a great example. The cost delta of building a fab here versus in Asia, 50%. And about 60% of that delta was just subsidies from other governments. Now, our choice could be, well, if they want to be that stupid to subsidize that, let them be that stupid. The problem is then we don't have that capability. So you either develop a global trade agreement and say no more subsidies. Well, that isn't going to happen, can't happen. Or you say, all right, well, we're going to bite the bullet. We're going to have tax credits and some subsidies to build up 10 fabs in the U.S. and really get our capabilities up. So, and again, the cylinder thing, I think, is not quite the right example, because if you look at the semiconductor, one of the core components, it's simply a tax credit. You put a fab in the U.S., unless you're Chinese, if you're Singapore, if you're Korean, Japanese, European, whatever, we'll give you a tax credit. That's not picking winners. And real quickly on your European example, Europe, their number one goal at the end of the day is social policy. It's equity, inclusion, it's green. They don't really have an industrial policy to win in global competition in these industries. They really don't. And to the extent they do, they're underfunded. Every country has to get a little bit. Oh, we'll give the Czech Republic $1 million, but we got to make sure that Portugal gets some money too. So we'll give them $2 million. To the extent they've done some things, some of them have been okay, and some of them have not been okay. But I'll give you an example. Airbus, great success story for them. They built, cobbled together pieces of their aerospace to create a major competitor to Boeing. Now, I think they did it unfairly. We should have brought won the trade case sooner. But so it can be done. I wouldn't put the Europeans at the top of the list. I'd put Israel. I'd put Singapore. I'd put Korea. I'd put Taiwan. I think if you look at those 4 countries, they've really done a good job.
And now, without getting, going to current politics, and really without getting into the partisanship of it, because there's plenty of that, and we have more productive things to do than to fight about that, argue that, is in President Trump, with his tariffs, with his ideas about reshoring, not even friendshoring, but reshoring. You could say it's a potentially very destructive whirlwind that has come in and hit, or that's how some people would call it. But does he have the right idea in terms of trying, perhaps desperately, to bring back industries that many people say cannot be brought back? Does he have the right idea, and maybe it's the implementation that's perhaps lacking?
So I give President Trump credit on 2 major fronts. One is to recognize and point out that the way we were doing globalization, I support globalization, I support trade. The way we were doing it was not very good. It really was hurting the U.S. in a lot of ways, because the other countries had all these ways to cheat, particularly the Chinese, that the World Trade Organization couldn't manage. I won't get into all the details of why. And he was right to point that out. He was right to point out that the Chinese hollowed out our manufacturing. And he was right to point out that we do need more manufacturing back in the U.S., and we've got to take strong steps to do it. Where I would disagree with the president is there's sort of 2 goals in that. One is you can say, you know what, we want to get baseball bats, and we want to get jet airplanes. We want both. My view would be, I don't care about baseball bats. I don't care about Happy Meal toys. I don't care about T-shirts. I'm sorry. There's a reason low-income countries can do that. It helps them. We don't need it. What I do care about are these strategic industries. And so my criticism of President Trump is kind of going in the right direction, but I wish he was more strategic and had a real strategy about what industries are most important, and then what are the right tools to get us to make sure we have strength there. And I don't think that's happening right now.
Do you think, and is an example that always comes to mind, that if we had to build the iPhone back in the United States, it would cost 3 times as much, and it would take you 2 years or 3 years to get one, because, and I remember this story, is that if you had to collect all the engineers, who could, work with the machines and build it, you could fill a couple of ballrooms here. And in China, you would fill stadiums.
Yeah.
We've lost that ability to do that.
Yeah.
Is that true? Is that hyperbole? Can we bring that skill set back? Do we want to bring that skill set back? Those kinds of specific skills back?
So they're different. Absolutely. So the difference between assembling iPhones, which, I don't know if you saw the funny Chinese government, CCP videos of, a lot of people thought they were insulting, and they weren't, fat Americans, overweight,
That's ridiculous.
Yeah, doing this stuff. Look, we don't, those aren't the right jobs. I'm sorry, those aren't. They're good manufacturing jobs, but that's not one of them. The more important question, though, is the iPhone is not just about those jobs. It's about engineers. It's about engineering technicians. And one of the problems in the U.S. is, as we've hollowed out, we've got fewer people going into those fields. We have fewer academic programs, so then we have fewer companies, and you get this chicken or egg issue. That doesn't get solved overnight. You can't just flip a switch and say, damn, we're here. But it does require moving from decline into a growth mode. And if we begin to be in a growth mode, then you see more companies going into the area. You see more universities cranking out people who can do it. And we're already seeing that in semiconductors, where there's a number of really good PhD and master's programs that have been expanded, like at Purdue. There are community college programs in places like New York and Arizona. So we're not going to be able to do this overnight. I mean, if you put these massive tariff walls up, it's not going to happen right away. It's a long process it took to get out of it, to hurt us. It's going to be a long process to get us back in. So we need to think it more, I think, more gradually. But absolutely, if we try to do everything ourselves, which I think in some people in the Trump administration, not everybody, there are some high-level Trump officials who see it differently. Yeah, we would. The cost would definitely go up. But at the same time, I'm sympathetic to the other side. Oh, damn, I get to have everything cheap. Well, yeah, you get everything cheap because you're essentially mortgaging your future. We run $1 trillion trade deficit every year. And what that means is that at some point in time, we're going to have to give these other countries real things. So we shouldn't be running $1 trillion trade deficit. We should have balanced trade. And that requires growing some of our manufacturing to get there.
I want to shift gears, for the last part. As I read your book, one of the themes was, we need to trust technology. We need to trust innovation. It's brought us tremendously good things. And we have this, sort of, a history of antitrust. I mean, in some ways, we're very glad to have seen the back end of Lena Khan, who absolutely sort of hated everything, it seemed like.
Yep.
She stopped supermarkets from merging that didn't have an overlap.
Yeah.
It's just better for everybody.
Yeah.
It almost seems like we need to believe in innovation. We need to believe in technology, that it's our friend and our partner and not necessarily our enemy. And I thought that, do we need somebody who's like an innovation evangelist, like somebody who's more or less beyond reproach, though that's hard to do these days, harder and harder, because everything you've ever said and done can pop right back out on the internet. So a champion like that. But the first person I thought was Elon Musk, and maybe Elon Musk, 3 years ago or something. But is there anybody with a stature like that? It's not Bezos. It's not it's not Satya Nadella. Would that work? Do we need a champion like that to make people believe again?
Yeah. Well, what's sad about Musk, he should have just, I don't know what he was smoking, but just don't go near government, man. It's not your thing. It'd be like me saying, I'm going to run Tesla. I don't know anything about running Tesla. He didn't know anything about the government and Dodge. It was a huge mistake, and it polarized him. He was a great evangelist. Like, wow, I want to build these tunnels, with the high-speed thing. The Tesla is a great example of electric car, solar city, all these things, the humanoid robot. Man, he was like the Edison of the day, and he squandered that. I think, and the problem with most of the other people who do it, they're corporate CEOs. That's not their job. They don't have time for it. They don't want the hassle. You had somebody like Mark Andreessen at Andreessen Horowitz, a venture capital firm. Mark was the inventor of Netscape. I don't know if he came out with a piece about a year and a half ago, this kind of innovation manifesto. And, it was pushing the edge maybe a little bit but I agreed with 99% of it. And he got pilloried by the elite class. How dare he say that innovation is going to, how arrogant are you? Well, he's arrogant in the sense that he's involved in so many of these things. He knows what's going on. I actually think the guy who might be able and willing and have the stature to do it, Jensen Huang from NVIDIA, the CEO, he seems like he speaks out. He critiqued that AI job loss recently. But you're absolutely right. We need people like that. For every Elon or Jensen, there's 100 of the anti-techs. Tech's going to kill us. Tech is taking our privacy. Tech is making you stupid. It's on and on and on, because that's how you sell books. The one thing, I shouldn't say one thing we have that still is in our favor is we still have real risk takers, bold thinkers, want to do big, bold things, and they can get money for it in the U.S. And when we're sort of stepping on that or bemoaning it or demeaning it, that to me is pretty serious. I mean, that's like demeaning the entire country, the republic, the nature of our whole system, because that's what we've been from the 1789. That was us. And so it really does worry me when people start saying, "Oh, technology," like, "Oh, social media." Like, I can communicate with all my friends from all around the world now so easily. I can, I can get on ChatGPT and get all the stuff I could never get. I mean, how could you not think this was fantastic?
Yeah, you make a great point, and maybe Jensen is the right guy. He sort of got that little coolness factor to him.
Yeah, the leather jacket.
Yeah, right. And I remember, this is probably 10 years ago, Warren Buffett, I want to say, said something about, maybe I should give my entire fortune to Elon Musk because he's going to do more with it than I ever could. And you need a guy like that. And Elon, I mean, without getting political, I mean, I think he felt a threat from a certain quarter, and he decided he wanted to get involved, and that can be very, very painful. But maybe Jensen's the right guy, or maybe if you find him, Rob, boost that guy up, because I think we need to believe, and not have Skynet, and the AI is going to kill us all. Find a champion and boost them up, and tell the administration to boost them up.
I 100% agree.
Or her. Or her.
One of the big problems, I think, is if you look at the major philanthropic foundations, most of them are on the left, there's some on the right, and rich people out of Silicon Valley, they largely put their money, and we talk about this in the book, into an anti-technology narrative. Mm-hmm. So the Ford Foundation, for example, funds over 100 groups a year whose narrative is technology is a problem. Technology is going to be this, technology is going to be that. The point being, there's another whole group of, the 3 or 4 incredibly rich, a couple of Facebook founders who have put literally hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars into a campaign to slow down AI and to tell us that AI is this existential risk to kill us. If you say that enough to people, they will go, "God damn, Arnold Schwarzenegger's coming."
Well, this space. You find our man, or
that's my goal.
Evangelist. That was really wonderful. I loved your book. Thank you so much for your time today.